Last time I made a video introducing the prospect of speculative psychology, I used as my premier example a creature very primally related and I believe evolutionarily similar to ourselves. So now I'm sure you'd probably expect me to go forward onto the other proverbial foot and address the grumpy feline in the room. However, instead I'm going to circle my horse back around and do second what I rationally should have led this loony wagon with, establishing the foundational formula for deriving a hypothetical model of non-human sentient psychology by naming our variables. What is life? What is sentience? How does the mind fit into the body, fit into the environment, and so on? First off, some people might take umbrage with my saying sentience and not sapient. My reason for this is that, colloquially, the former implies no more than the possession of consciousness, defined by me for my purposes as an awareness of the self in space, and of what I've chosen to call morbidity, or awareness of the self across time. This as opposed to sapience, which implies a more hominid-specific cerebral matrix, which defies the point of our ongoing thought experiment. And to the second point, I'm going to just repeat my definition from my first Project Outlander video. To wit, to the best of my strictly amateur logic, and strictly for my own personal use, I've brewed up a 4-point criteria list for qualifying a life form. 1. It must be self-perpetuating, meaning it must have the intrinsic ability and motivation to sustain the fundamental patterns of its being across time. 2. It must be self-maintaining, meaning it must have the intrinsic ability and motivation to recuperate after being damaged, as well as to provide for its own basic care and sustenance. 3. It must be motivationally dynamic, meaning it must have the intrinsic ability and motivation to respond to external stimuli in ways accordant with its needs. And 4. It must be self-propagating, meaning it must have the intrinsic ability and motivation to replicate its own fundamental patterns across its environment. A quick note here just so I don't get 50 comments about it. No, motivation does not require you to have a brain, as it is simply a force or influence which compels a change in something. That is why a plant, a fungus, an amoeba, a dog, and you and I all count as life, but a car or a computer would not. Even a fully sentient AI, unless it can and does, on regular occasion, reformulate its own data without external prompting, would fall short of my mark. And now, with that all said, normally I don't read the diagrams I put on screen, since that's normally just a cheap way to pad out the runtime to farm watch minutes and maybe sneak mid-roll ads in there as some side candy. But, in this case, I do actually want to go into more substantive detail on each of the 8 points I've outlined here. And just in case it's not obvious, what you're looking at are the 8 most salient variables that I believe form the foundation of a sentient psychology. If you're familiar at all with the Big 5 personality scale theory, this is like that, only much more broad and open-ended. And to answer the question of why 8 variables, I could give you some elaborate spiel about how, after distilling and compressing every possible mental spectra down into the lowest conceivable set, this was the number that resulted. But the real, simple truth of the matter is that I already had the 8-pointed star asset in my file drawer and my operative plan just so happened to click with it. So, if I'm missing something, feel free to comment down below and I'll perform updates as and if I think it appropriate. Now, with that all on the table, let us begin. Starting off with the obvious predicate points for cognition, senses, locomotion, and manipulation. These are all critical as the whole reason we have brains at all is to help us decide how, when, where, and why to act. Or really, more accurately, when not to act. And of course, in order to do so intelligently, not haphazardly like a bacteria or Roomba does, we must have a method of determining what around us is hostile and what is useful. We must possess a means of systematizing motions, concepts, entities, and environments. This is what intelligence is at its very core. In short, the reason we can reason is to promote efficiency. Creativity is a more complex, heuristic form of this that enables abstract thought, and so allows us to concoct solutions to novel problems on the fly. I've discussed nearly every part and aspect of this, as well as their consequential trade-offs, more thoroughly elsewhere. For now, just know that I've chosen to name this facet of our nature the reductive drive, since it serves to prune our activity down to the least necessary to accomplish a particular task, which leads us nicely into the modus operandi of every living thing, cerebral or otherwise. As a general rule, everything that lives on Earth needs 4 things to maintain their corporeal state: a source of material substances, a soluble medium, a means of guarding against hazards and predators, and a source of chemical energy. In normal English, this translates to food, water, shelter, oxygen, and/or sunlight. Naturally, the creative and instinctive methods employed to secure these things constitutes the first half of what I've chosen to dub the procreative instinct. As I've said several times before when discussing artistic topics, the creative and procreative drivers live on the same circuit board and so consequently travel along mutual highways. This is why people with strong, for want of a better term, deviant or exploratory proclivities in one arena will often bleed those tendencies into the other. And speaking of sex, let's now look to the flip side to that operative coin, reproductive strategy. This one's perhaps the most complicated and integral of all, as the only reason why the subject in question exists in the form they do at all is because a multiplicity of generations before them managed to stay alive long enough to have sex and were successful in raising at least some of the fruits of their labors to viable ascendancy, which is where the 4 cardinal breeding patterns come into the picture. In briefest summary, they are as follows: monogamy, mate for life; promiscuity, mate opportunistically, usually during a set breeding season or period; pair bonding, parents mate until offspring are mature enough to be independent, usually during a set breeding season or period; and polygamy, simultaneous pair bonding between a single member of one sex and multiple partners of the other. Here's where I'm going to get a bit more controversial. We can't have a mature conversation about complex life, sentient or otherwise, without bringing sex, male and female, and gender, masculine and feminine, into the mix. As Sigmund Freud put it, all energy is sexual energy. Nearly everything a living thing does, from morning till nightfall, from spring until winter, has to do with mating in some way. Now, as usual, I'll do my best to not step on anyone's political or ideological sensibilities any more than I absolutely must to make my case. But if we're being honest, this is the internet in 2024. To coin a line from the Cheshire Cat, here's a riddle. When is your morality like a sledgehammer? I'll tell you, whenever you want it to be. As far as I'm concerned for this project, the sex of an organism refers to its role in the initial conception of offspring. If it fills the role of the inseminator, meaning it plants or sows the seeds, then it's a male. If it fills the role of the incubator, meaning it gestates the budding seedlings, then it's a female. Now, gender's a bit more complicated, as it refers to an organism's natural, instinctive role in rearing the offspring. In human terms, if it primarily fills the role of protector and or provider, then it's masculine, and if it mainly serves as a caretaker and nursemaid of the young and or the nest, then it's feminine. However, this is only true in a situation where the two parents are pair bonded, either monogamously or polygamously. In pretty much all other mammals, the female takes full care and custody of all her young post-copulation, with the only male assistance being in the form of her familial tribe, herd, or troop, if she has one, though they're also just as likely to kill any newborns that aren't theirs on sight. While in some, more rare cases, like the emperor penguin or seahorse, the male takes over the role as primary nest tender while the female goes out to get food. Basically, my point here is that trying to fit the totality of nature into a human-centric mold is like trying to fit a whole live lobster into your mouth. It won't work, and would only serve to make your earliest common ancestor feel superior. And speaking of ancestral traits, it's hard to understate just how the lives of our primitive ancestors impact us to this day. For example, many of you have likely heard that the reason we have colored vision is because it helped our ancestors better discriminate between ripe and rotten fruit, as well as between what was a tree branch or a snake looking to eat their young. Such survival advantages are also the reason why human females can, on average, perceive a greater variety of colors, sounds, and scents than human males can, as well as why they're more detail-oriented, prone to anxiety, and why they tend to scream when startled. All of these stem from their being themselves more vulnerable than the males, as well as being the primary caregivers of infants. Being hypervigilant, hypersensitive, and overly cautious wasn't just to their own individual survival benefit, but to the survival of the species overall as well. The last point I'd like to end this thing on is this. There is no such thing as morality in nature. I've stated before my belief that capitalism is just economic Darwinism, and what I mean by that is that both are impersonal, amoral, means-agnostic, single-variable, algorithmic equations, meaning that success under either or means being able to continually answer a single yes-no question in the affirmative. In the case of natural selection, that question is, can you produce viable offspring, meaning offspring that can themselves do the same? So long as the answer to that is yes, nature doesn't care how you do it. Just so it is for capitalism, which simply asks, can you procure enough wealth to maintain or grow your current enterprise? Again, so long as the answer is yes, The system couldn't care less whence the money flows, just so long as it does. And now that we have our baseline established, and I've yet another 10-minute slog to try and somehow make digestible, I think I'll go ahead and bid all you fine-feathered folks another adieu. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. Leave me a like and subscribe if you like the work I do. If you've one to spare, consider tossing me a coin or becoming a channel member to support me regularly. I'm thinking about starting a Patreon where I'd post narrated chapters of my Flint Pirate Academy novels. There's a poll on the community page where you can vote on if that's something you'd be interested in supporting. That'll be linked below. And of course, consider also checking out my novels and various other eclectic works if you'd like a bit of strange science fantasy adventure in your life. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, life's too short to take seriously. Peace.